November 14th, 1819. The London society papers called it the Night of the Shattered Sapphire. To the untrained eye, it was just another lavish ball at the residence of the Earl of Sefton. But historians now know that the events of that evening didn't just ruin a reputation. They altered the course of British politics. A young woman, Lady Amelia Clare, was seen fleeing the ballroom in hysterics, vanishing into the foggy gardens. Seconds later, she collided with Andrew Stirling, the Duke of Blackwood, a man so ruthless, Parliament terrified him. Everyone thought it was a love story. They were wrong. It was a conspiracy. And it started with a scream. To understand why Amelia Clare was running for her life that night, we first have to look at the guest list. The winter season of 1819 was particularly brutal, both in weather and in politics. The Napoleonic Wars were over, but the internal wars of the British aristocracy were raging. Lady Amelia Clare was 22 years old, already dangerously close to being considered a spinster by the unforgiving standards of the ton. Diaries recovered from the Clare estate describe her not as the typical blushing debutante, but as a woman carrying a heavy, invisible burden. She was described by her contemporary, Lady Jersey, as having eyes like a stormy sea, always watching, never resting. Why was she watching? Because her father, Baron Silas Clare, was a man drowning in debt. The Clare ledger, discovered in a private auction in 1924, revealed the truth. Baron Clare hadn't just gambled away the family fortune at White's. He had borrowed money from the most dangerous loan sharks in London's East End. But worse than the sharks was the man who held the Baron's ultimate promissory note, Lord Thomas Thorne. Thorne is the villain of this history. He wasn't just a wealthy aristocrat. He was a predator who used debt to collect people. And on the night of November 14th, at the Sefton ball, he decided it was time to collect Amelia. The ball was held at the Sefton mansion in Arlington Street. The atmosphere was suffocating. Hundreds of beeswax candles heated the air, mixing with the scent of heavy perfumes and desperation. Amelia stood near the periphery of the dance floor. She was wearing a gown of pale blue silk, the color of the sapphire she would later be associated with. According to a letter written by her cousin, Mary Godwin, Amelia was trembling. At approximately 9 p.m., Lord Thorne approached her. Witnesses say the exchange was brief. Thorne, a man known for his charming smile that never quite reached his dead eyes, leaned in close to Amelia's ear. He wasn't asking for a dance. He was delivering an ultimatum. Historians speculate on what was exactly said, but lip readers interpreting the recount of bystanders believe he said, "Your father has until midnight to announce our betrothal, Amelia, or the Crown receives the ledger." The ledger didn't just prove debt. It proved that Baron Clare had been selling naval secrets to cover his losses. Thorne held the power to send Amelia's father to the gallows for treason. Amelia, trapped between the destruction of her family and a marriage to a monster, felt the walls closing in. The orchestra began a lively reel, the laughter of the crowd rising to a fever pitch, but to Amelia it sounded like a gavel striking a judge's bench. She couldn't breathe. The corset felt like iron ribs crushing her lungs. Panic, raw and primal, seized her. She didn't curate a polite exit. She didn't curtsy to the host. Lady Amelia Clare, the daughter of a baron, broke protocol in the most scandalous way possible. She turned and ran. She pushed past the Dowager Countess of Lonsdale, nearly knocking the elderly woman over. Heads turned. Whispers ignited like wildfire. Amelia didn't care. She burst through the double doors leading to the terrace, desperate for the biting cold of the November night. The terrace was empty, or so she thought. The fog had rolled in off the Thames, thick and grey, obscuring the gas lamps. Amelia made it to the stone balustrade, gripping the cold railing, gasping for air, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. She was sobbing, a guttural sound of pure hopelessness. She thought she was alone in the dark. She was wrong. Standing in the shadows of a stone pillar, smoking a cheroot, was a figure who had been watching the ball from the outside, Andrew Stirling, the 8th Duke of Blackwood. If Thorne was a predator, Blackwood was a force of nature. At 32, he was the most powerful peer in England. He was also the most feared. They called him the Ice Wolf of the House of Lords. He was known for his rigid control, his terrifying intelligence, and a complete lack of emotion. He had returned from the continent 2 years prior, with a limp he refused to explain, and a scar that ran through his left eyebrow, giving him a permanent look of skepticism. He detested balls. He detested tears even more. Amelia, blinded by her panic, spun around to flee into the gardens. And that is when it happened. She slammed full force into a wall of black wool and muscle. The impact knocked the breath out of her. She stumbled back, losing her footing on the slick cobblestones. She would have fallen onto the unforgiving stone had a hand, large, gloved, and terrifyingly strong, not shot out and gripped her arm. It wasn't a gentle catch. It was a clamp of iron. Amelia looked up, gasping, her vision blurred by tears. Through the fog she saw him. The sharp jawline, the scar, the eyes that were darker than the night around them. Andrew Stirling didn't ask if she was all right. He didn't offer a handkerchief. He looked down at the sobbing woman who had just assaulted his solitude with the cold detachment of a coroner examining a body. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low, deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the cold air. It was devoid of sympathy. "Composure, madam," the Duke said, his voice like gravel grinding on silk. "You are making a scene, and I detest scenes." Amelia froze. The shock of his coldness cut through her panic. She tried to pull her arm away, but his grip held firm. "Let me go," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Not until you tell me," Andrew said, stepping closer, forcing her to look at him. "Why the daughter of Baron Clare is running from Lord Thorne, as if the devil himself were nipping at her heels." Amelia's eyes went wide. He knew. The Duke of Blackwood wasn't just a guest. He was the Minister of War's closest confidant. And he had been watching Thorne all night. The romance didn't begin with a kiss. It began with an interrogation. Amelia realized in that terrifying moment that she hadn't escaped the fire. She had just jumped into the ice. And the Duke of Blackwood was not a man who let secrets, or women, slip through his fingers. But before she could answer, the terrace doors banged open. Lord Thorne stood there, silhouetted against the light of the ballroom, his face twisted in a mask of false concern. "Amelia, darling," Thorne called out, stepping into the cold. "There you are." Amelia flinched, instinctively stepping behind the Duke. Andrew Stirling felt the movement. He felt the trembling body of the woman shielding herself with his own. For the first time in a decade, something stirred in the chest of the coldest Duke in England. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was possessiveness. Andrew released her arm, only to place himself fully between Amelia and Thorne. He took a slow drag of his cheroot, the ember glowing orange in the fog, and exhaled the smoke in Thorne's direction. "Thorne," Andrew said. The name sounded like a curse. "You seem to have misplaced something." "My fiancée is unwell, Your Grace," Thorne sneered, though he halted his approach. "I am merely collecting her." Andrew dropped the cheroot and crushed it beneath his boot. "She does not look unwell, Thorne. She looks terrified. And as of this moment," Andrew turned his head slightly, his peripheral vision catching Amelia's tear-streaked face, She is under the protection of the House of Blackwood." The lie hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. He had just claimed her, publicly, to a man who held her father's life in his hands. Amelia looked up at the Duke's rigid back. She had fled a blackmailer only to be claimed by a tyrant. But as the snow began to fall, turning the London streets into a white shroud, she realized one thing. The Duke's hand, which had brushed against hers, was burning hot. The silence on the terrace was shattered, not by a scream, but by the sound of Andrew Stirling's boots hitting the cobblestones as he stepped forward. Lord Thorne did not retreat, but he flinched, a microscopic reaction that only a man like the Duke would notice. "Protection?" Thorne repeated, his voice dropping an octave, stripping away the veneer of politeness. "You overstep, Blackwood. She is practically betrothed to me. We have an understanding with her father." Andrew didn't blink. He adjusted the cuffs of his coat with agonizing slowness. "An understanding is not a ring, Thorne, and a debt is not a vow." Amelia stopped breathing. How did he know about the debt? Andrew turned his back on Thorne, the ultimate insult in London society, and looked down at Amelia. Up close, the ice wolf was even more imposing. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, clear and sharp as cut glass. There was no warmth in them, but there was a terrifying clarity. "My carriage is waiting, Lady Amelia," he said. It wasn't an offer. It was a command. "I suggest you take it before the frost settles in your lungs. You are shivering." Amelia looked past him at Thorne. The blackmailer's face was twisted in a rictus of silent fury, his eyes promising retribution. But he could not challenge a Duke of the Realm in the open, not here, not with the Sefton's butler now peering curiously through the glass doors. Amelia made a choice. She gathered her silk skirts, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold the fabric, and nodded. "Thank you, Your Grace." Andrew escorted her to the waiting black carriage, emblazoned with the Blackwood crest, a silver hawk clutching a spear. He didn't offer his arm to comfort her. He offered it to steady her, his muscles rigid as stone beneath the wool. Once inside the carriage, the door slammed shut, sealing them in a box of velvet and darkness. The carriage lurched forward, the horses' hooves clattering on the cobblestones of Arlington Street. For a long time there was only silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. Amelia sat on the edge of the bench, pressing herself against the squabs as if trying to merge with the upholstery. Andrew sat opposite her. He did not look at her. He stared out the window at the passing gas lamps, his profile sharp and unreadable. Amelia studied him in the intermittent flashes of light. He was a man composed of sharp angles and rigid control. Rumours said he had once ordered a man to be hanged for stealing a loaf of bread from army rations. Rumours said he had no heart. "You are staring," Andrew said. He didn't turn his head. Amelia jumped. I apologize, Your Grace. I am merely confused." "Confused?" Andrew finally turned to look at her. The carriage was dim, but his eyes seemed to catch the faint light. "You just escaped a viper, only to climb into the den of a wolf. Confusion is the natural state of the prey." "I am not prey," Amelia said, a spark of her father's old pride flaring up. "Aren't you?" Andrew leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. The movement sucked the air out of the small cabin. "Let us analyze the board, Lady Amelia. Your father, Baron Clare, has not paid his membership fees at White's in 6 months. He has mortgaged the Clare estate in Kent 3 times over. And tonight you were cornered by Thomas Thorne, a man who collects people like butterflies and pins them to cork boards." Andrew paused, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than a shout. "Thorne does not want a wife. He wants leverage. What does your father have that Thorn wants?" Amelia felt the tears pricking her eyes again, but she willed them away. She would not cry in front of this man. "My father. He holds a seat in the House of Lords, a seat that is crucial for the upcoming vote on the Naval Appropriations Bill." Andrew's eyes narrowed. The political animal in him awoke. "The Naval Bill. Thorn wants to vote down the funding to weaken the blockade. He's a war profiteer." Andrew sat back, a look of disgust crossing his face. "So he buys your father's debt, forces a marriage to you, and controls the Baron's vote. It is crude, but effective." "He said he would send my father to prison," Amelia whispered, the truth spilling out like blood from a wound. "He has a ledger. My father. He sold information, old naval routes. It's treason, Your Grace." The word hung in the air. Treason. Andrew closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the temperature in the carriage seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Treason," he repeated flatly. "If this gets out, your father hangs. And you will be destitute, exiled from society. You will starve in the streets of Cheapside." "I know," Amelia said, her voice breaking. "That is why I have to marry Thorn." "No." The refusal was absolute. Andrew reached into his coat and pulled out a silver flask. He unscrewed the cap and held it out to her. "Drink. It is brandy. It will stop the shaking." Amelia took a small sip. The liquid burned her throat, but the warmth spread through her chest, grounding her. "Why did you help me?" she asked, handing the flask back. "You don't know me. You are the Duke of Blackwood. You care for nothing but order and politics." Andrew took a sip himself, his gaze lingering on the rim where her lips had touched. "Precisely. I care for order. Thorn is chaos. If he controls your father's vote, he disrupts the balance of Parliament. I cannot allow that." He leaned forward again, and this time he took her hand. His gloves were gone. His skin was rough, calloused from fencing and riding. The contact sent a shockwave through Amelia's arm. "I did not save you for your sake, Amelia," he said, using her given name for the first time. It sounded intimate and dangerous on his tongue. "I saved you because you are a piece on the board that I need to control." "Control?" Amelia pulled her hand back, but he didn't resist. "Thorn thinks he has won. He thinks you are his. Tomorrow morning, the papers will announce that you left the ball with me. By noon, your reputation will be shredded." "You ruined me," Amelia gasped, realizing the horror of the situation. A solitary woman in a carriage with a duke. It was social suicide. "I saved your life," Andrew corrected her. "But to keep saving it, we must escalate. Thorn has the ledger. But I have the one thing Thorn fears." "What is that?" "I have you." Andrew's face was unreadable, a mask of stone. "We are going to your father's house, and I am going to make a counteroffer." "You want to marry me?" Amelia asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. Andrew looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He took in the messy blonde curls, the terrified blue eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. "Marriage is a sentiment for poets," Andrew said coldly. "I am proposing an alliance. I will marry you to shield you from Thorn. You will give me the Clare vote. It is a business transaction. And if I refuse?" Andrew knocked on the roof of the carriage with his cane, signaling the driver to turn onto the street where the Clare townhouse stood. "Then, my dear Amelia," he said softly, "you can explain to the hangman why his rope is around your father's neck." The carriage slowed to a halt. Outside, the fog had turned into a heavy sleet. Amelia looked at the Duke. He was cruel. He was cold. He was manipulating her just as Thorn was. But as he reached out to open the carriage door, he paused. He took off his heavy black cloak and draped it over her shoulders. The wool was heavy, smelling of tobacco and sandalwood. "Cover yourself," he murmured, his hand lingering near her neck for a fraction of a second too long. "The press is already waiting." Amelia looked out the window. He was right. 3 men with notebooks were standing under the gaslight of her doorstep. She looked back at Andrew. "I accept." Andrew nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now, dry your eyes, Lady Amelia. A duchess does not weep." The following morning, November 15th, London woke up to a grey sky and a scandal that burned brighter than any hearth fire. The Morning Post, usually reserved for dull announcements of shipping lanes and court circulars, bore a headline that scandalized every breakfast table in Mayfair. "The Ice Wolf captures a dove." "Lady Amelia Clare flees Sefton Ball in the carriage of the Duke of Blackwood." The article, written by the notorious gossip columnist, known only as Spectator, believed by modern historians to be a disgraced former valet, was scathing. It detailed the hysterical flight of the Baron's daughter and the predatory intervention of the Duke. Inside the Clare townhouse on Curzon Street, the atmosphere was not one of scandal, but of funeral silence. Amelia sat in the drawing room. The curtains were drawn, the room was shabby, the velvet on the chaise was threadbare, and the wallpaper was peeling in the corners. Signs of poverty her father had tried desperately to hide. Baron Silas Clare paced the floor. He was a small man, his face ruddy from years of port wine and anxiety. He held the newspaper in shaking hands. "Ruined," Silas muttered. "Absolutely ruined. Thorn will destroy us. He sent a messenger at dawn, Amelia. At dawn. He demands payment in full by noon, or he goes to the magistrate." Amelia sat staring at her cold tea. She wore a high-collared grey dress, armour against the world. She felt numb. "I told you, Father. The Duke of Blackwood has a plan." "Blackwood?" Silas laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Andrew Sterling doesn't have plans for people like us, Amelia. He eats people like us. He probably took you for his own amusement and dumped you back here to watch us burn." "He gave me his cloak," Amelia said quietly, looking at the black wool garment folded neatly on the side table. "It was the only expensive thing in the room." "A cloak!" Silas threw the newspaper into the fire. "Will a cloak pay the £20,000 we owe Thorn? Will a cloak save me from the Tower?" Suddenly, a thunderous knock echoed through the house. Silas froze. "It's the runners. They're here to arrest me." He collapsed into an armchair, burying his face in his hands. "I'm a dead man." Amelia stood up. Her legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to walk to the hallway. Their butler, an elderly man named Higgins, who hadn't been paid in 3 months, opened the door. It wasn't the police. Andrew Sterling stood in the doorway. He was impeccable. He wore a charcoal morning coat, a pristine white cravat, and polished Hessian boots. He looked like a statue carved from authority. Behind him stood 2 men, clerks, carrying stacks of parchment. "Your Grace," Higgins stammered, bowing so low his nose nearly touched the floor. Andrew stepped inside, bringing the cold November air with him. He didn't look at the butler. His eyes locked instantly onto Amelia. He scanned her face, checking for... What? Tears? Regret? "Lady Amelia," Andrew said, inclining his head slightly. "I trust you slept well?" "As well as one can on the gallows, Your Grace," she replied. A ghost of a smile touched Andrew's lips. "Excellent. Then you are prepared." He walked past her into the drawing room. Baron Clare looked up, his face pale as a sheet. He scrambled to his feet. "Your Grace, I can explain. The girl is foolish. "Sit down, Claire," Andrew commanded. He didn't raise his voice, but the Baron collapsed back into the chair as if his strings had been cut. Andrew gestured to the clerks, who immediately began laying documents out on the tea table, pushing aside the china cups. "What is this?" Silas whispered. "This," Andrew said, stripping off his gloves, "is a restructuring of your assets." He picked up a document. "I have purchased your debts from the moneylenders in Whitechapel. Every shilling." Silas's jaw dropped. You paid them?" "I bought them," Andrew corrected. "You now owe me. And unlike the sharks, I do not break kneecaps. I break estates." He picked up another paper. "I have also had a private conversation with the Prime Minister regarding the rumours of a certain ledger containing naval secrets. We agreed that such rumours are undoubtedly French propaganda. The ledger, wherever it is now considered irrelevant by the Crown." Amelia gasped. He had neutralized the treason charge. He had used his influence to bury it. Thorne's blackmail was useless. "You saved me," Silas breathed, looking at the Duke with something akin to worship. "Do not mistake this for charity," Andrew said, his voice sharpening. "I despise traitors, Claire. If it were up to me, you would rot. But you are the father of my future wife, and I do not wish for my father-in-law to be hanged. It creates a mess at the wedding breakfast." Silas looked from Andrew to Amelia. "Wife?" "Amelia and I are to be married by special license in 3 days," Andrew stated. "You will announce the betrothal today. You will also proxy your vote in the House of Lords to me indefinitely." Silas nodded frantically. Yes, of course. Anything." Andrew turned to Amelia. The business was done. Now came the personal cost. "Walk with me, Amelia," he said. They walked to the window overlooking the street. The clerks and her father were busy signing papers, ignoring them. "Thorne will be furious," Amelia said softly. "Thorne is already finished," Andrew replied. "Without the leverage of the debt, he is just a man with a bad reputation. I have crushed him." "You enjoy it," she observed, looking up at his profile. "Crushing people." Andrew looked down at her. "I enjoy winning." "And what about me?" Amelia asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Did you win me too? Am I just a prize of war?" Andrew hesitated. For a moment, the mask slipped. He looked at her not as a politician, but as a man. He reached out and brushed a stray curl from her forehead. His touch was gentle, startlingly so. "You are not a prize, Amelia," he said, his voice low and rough. "You are a responsibility, and I take my responsibilities very seriously." "Is that all?" She searched his eyes. "That is all it can be," he said, the ice returning to his gaze. "I am not a man capable of warmth, Amelia. Do not expect affection. I will give you safety. I will give you a title. I will give you the world. But I cannot give you a heart I do not have." Amelia felt a pang of sorrow, not for herself, but for him. He truly believed he was broken. "I think, Your Grace," she said, stepping closer to him, defying his coldness, "that you might be wrong." Andrew stiffened. He looked like he wanted to pull away, but he didn't. "We shall see," he muttered. At that moment, the front door crashed open. The peaceful victory was short-lived. "You think you can steal from me, Blackwood?" It was Lord Thorne. He had bypassed the butler, his face purple with rage, a cane raised in his hand. He wasn't alone. Behind him were 2 hired thugs, rough men from the docks. Andrew didn't flinch. He didn't even turn around fully. He simply sighed, a sound of immense boredom. "Amelia," Andrew said calmly, "please step behind me." "Andrew, he has men," Amelia warned, clutching his arm. Andrew slowly turned to face Thorne. A dark, terrifying smile spread across the Duke's face, a smile that Amelia had never seen before. It was the smile of the wolf, anticipating the kill. "Only two?" Andrew asked Thorn, unbuttoning his jacket to reveal the hilt of a pistol tucked into his waistband. "You insult me, Thomas." The drawing room of the Clare townhouse was too small for the violence that was about to unfold. The air, previously smelling of stale tea and old paper, was now sharp with the metallic tang of aggression. Lord Thorn stood by the mahogany sideboard, his chest heaving. The two men he had brought with him, burly figures with broken noses and knuckles scarred from years of prize fighting in the rookeries of St. Giles, stepped forward. They cracked their necks, looking at the Duke not as a peer of the realm, but as a target. Amelia pressed her back against the peeling wallpaper. She had seen men argue in Parliament. She had seen her father throw wine glasses in drunken stupors. But she had never seen lethal intent. Andrew Sterling did not move. He stood in the center of the room, his pistol held loosely at his side, the barrel pointed at the floor. He looked bored. "Thorn," Andrew said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You are making a mistake that your family will be paying for into the next century. Assaulting a duke is treason." "It's not assault if there are no witnesses," Thorn spat. He gestured to the terrified Baron Clare and the elderly butler. "They won't talk, and you'll just be another tragic accident, a robbery gone wrong." Thorn nodded to the largest thug. "Break his legs." The thug lunged. What happened next was so fast that Amelia's diary later described it as a blur of shadow and violence. Andrew didn't raise the pistol. He didn't fire. As the thug threw a heavy, clumsy haymaker punch, Andrew simply stepped inside the man's guard. The Duke's movement was fluid, practiced, the muscle memory of a soldier who had survived the Peninsula campaign. Andrew dropped his weight, driving his elbow into the thug's solar plexus with a sickening thud. The man doubled over, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Before the man could fall, Andrew grabbed the back of his head and drove his knee into the man's nose. Bone crunched, blood sprayed onto the faded Persian rug. The man collapsed like a sack of grain. The second thug hesitated, eyes widening. He pulled a knife from his boot, a rusted, jagged blade. Amelia screamed, "Andrew!" The distraction cost the thug a fraction of a second. Andrew didn't look at Amelia. He swung his heavy arm, the pistol acting as a bludgeon, striking the man's wrist. The knife clattered across the floor. Andrew followed through with a backhand strike across the man's jaw, sending him spinning into the tea table, shattering the china. Silence returned to the room, heavier than before. Two men were groaning on the floor. Andrew stood above them, his breathing only slightly elevated, his cravat perfectly straight. He slowly raised the pistol, leveling it directly at Lord Thorn's forehead. Thorn was trembling. The arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the primal fear of a prey animal facing a predator. "Andrew," Thorn stammered, raising his hands. It was a misunderstanding." Andrew thumbed back the hammer of the pistol. The click echoed like a gunshot in the small room. "Get out," Andrew whispered. Get out!" Andrew stepped forward, the barrel inches from Thorn's skin. "If I see you in London again, Thorn, if I see you within 10 miles of my wife, I will not be so polite. I will hunt you down, and I will strip the skin from your bones." Thorn turned and ran, stumbling over his own hirelings, fleeing out the front door into the rain. The two thugs groaned and crawled after him, terrified of the demon in the charcoal coat. Andrew watched them go. He didn't lower the gun until the front door slammed shut. Then, the tension in his shoulders snapped. He swayed slightly. Amelia rushed forward, ignoring the propriety, ignoring the blood on the floor. She reached him, just as he leaned heavily against the mantel. "You're hurt," she gasped. There was a cut on his cheekbone, a thin line of red where the thug's ring had grazed him. But it was his hands that terrified her. The Duke's hands, those steady, iron hands, were shaking. "It is nothing," Andrew said, his voice tight. He holstered the pistol and pulled out a handkerchief, wiping the blood from his cheek with a grimace. "Adrenaline, a physiological response. It will pass." "You could have been killed," Amelia said, her voice rising. "They had a knife." Andrew looked at her. His grey eyes were dark, the pupils blown wide. For a moment, the ice wolf looked human. He looked haunted. "I have faced French cavalry charges, Amelia," he muttered, turning away from her to look into the fire. "Two street ruffians are hardly a concern." "Don't do that," she said, grabbing his sleeve. "Don't shut me out. You fought for me." Andrew looked down at her hand on his arm. He gently but firmly peeled her fingers away. "I fought for my property," he said coldly. "Do not romanticize violence, Amelia. It is ugly, and it is what I am good at. That is why you are safe with me. Not because I am kind, but because I am dangerous." He walked to the door, stepping over the shattered remains of a teacup. "Pack your things," he commanded, his back to her. "We leave for Blackwood Manor immediately after the ceremony. I will not have you in this undefended hovel a moment longer." Amelia watched him leave. She was safe, yes. But as she looked at the bloodstain on the carpet, she realized she was marrying a man who carried a war inside him. A war that never ended. The wedding of the Duke of Blackwood and Lady Amelia Clare was not the event of the season. It was a clandestine operation. Held 3 days later at St. George's, Hanover Square, the ceremony took place at dawn. The pews were empty, save for Baron Clare, who looked hungover, a weeping aunt, and the church witnesses. There were no flowers. There was no choir. The fog outside pressed against the stained glass, making the church feel like a crypt. Amelia wore a dress of ivory velvet, hurriedly altered from an old gown of her mother's. She felt like an impostor. When the vicar asked Andrew for the ring, he produced a heavy band of gold with a single dark sapphire, the Blackwood family stone. It was beautiful, but it felt cold as he slid it onto her finger. "With this ring, I thee wed," Andrew said. His voice did not waver. It was the tone of a man signing a treaty. "I, Amelia, take thee, Andrew," she whispered. When he kissed her, it was a chaste, dry press of lips against lips. It lasted less than a second. He pulled away immediately, his eyes scanning the church entrance, as if expecting an ambush. "It is done," he said. The journey to Blackwood Manor, the Duke's ancestral seat in Kent, took 6 hours. The carriage was larger than the one they had met in, filled with furs and warm bricks for their feet. But the distance between them felt infinite. Andrew spent the entire journey reading correspondence. He built a wall of paper between them. Amelia watched the English countryside roll by, the trees bare and skeletal against the winter sky. She was a duchess now. She was one of the most powerful women in England. And she had never felt more lonely. They arrived at Blackwood Manor after dark. It was a massive, brooding structure of grey stone, complete with turrets and a moat that had been drained and turned into a sunken garden. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress designed to keep the world out. The staff was lined up in the great hall to greet them. They were efficient, silent, and terrified of their master. "Dinner in my study," Andrew barked at the housekeeper, Mrs. Graves. "Her Grace will dine in her quarters. She is tired." Amelia blinked. "I am not tired, Andrew. I could eat with—" "You are tired," Andrew repeated, looking at her with that intractable gaze. "Go to your room, Amelia." It was a dismissal. Amelia was led up the grand staircase, down her winding corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, who all seemed to share Andrew's scar and his scowl. Her room was magnificent, a suite of blue and gold, with a fire roaring in the hearth and a bed large enough for 4 people. But she ate alone. Roast pheasant and wine, tasting of ash. As the grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight, Amelia sat at her vanity, brushing her hair. She wore a nightgown of white lace, part of the trousseau Andrew had purchased for her. She waited. It was their wedding night. Even in a marriage of convenience, there was an expectation. An heir was needed. A consummation was required to make the union legally binding against any challenge from Thorn. The doorknob turned. Amelia's heart slammed against her ribs. She stood up, clutching her hairbrush. Andrew entered. He had discarded his coat and cravat. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the hollow of his throat. He looked tired. For the first time, she saw the grey hairs at his temples, the lines of exhaustion etched around his mouth. He carried a candle. He did not come closer. He stood by the door, the shadows dancing across his face. "Andrew?" she whispered. He looked at her. His gaze travelled from her bare feet to her eyes. There was heat there, a flash of raw, masculine hunger that he couldn't hide. Amelia took a step toward him, drawn to it, but then the iron wolf slammed the gates shut. He looked away, staring at the wall. "I have come to tell you," he said, his voice strained, "that I will be sleeping in the west wing." Amelia froze. I do not understand. Is the marriage not to be consummated?" Andrew finished the sentence she couldn't say. "No. But the heir, the legality." "I have cousins who can inherit," Andrew said sharply. "And as for the legality, no one will question my word." "Is it me?" Amelia asked, a flush of humiliation rising up her neck. "Do you find me repulsive?" Andrew laughed, a short, bitter sound. He looked back at her, his eyes blazing. "Repulsive? Amelia, look in the mirror. You are the most beautiful thing to enter this tomb of a house in 100 years." "Then why?" she cried, stepping closer. "Why do you reject me?" Andrew held up a hand to stop her. "Because I am a husband, Amelia. I am a weapon. I am a man who destroys things." He gestured to his leg, the one with the limp. "I am scarred, inside and out. I have nothing to offer you but coldness and duty." He took a breath, visibly fighting for control. "You are 22. You have a life ahead of you. I will not shackle you to my bed. I will not force you to bear the children of a man who cannot love them." "You decided this for me?" Amelia demanded, anger overtaking her fear. "You bought my debts, you fought my battles, and now you decide what I want in my bed? You are arrogant, Andrew Sterling." "I am protecting you," he roared. The shout echoed off the stone walls. "From what? From yourself?" "Yes," Andrew whispered, the fight draining out of him. "From me." He placed a key on the table near the door. "Lock the door, Amelia," he said softly. "Lock it and go to sleep. You are safe here, even from me." He turned and walked out. Amelia stood in the center of the room, trembling. She heard his heavy footsteps receding down the hallway, the sound of a man marching away from the only warmth he had ever known. She looked at the key. She didn't lock the door. Instead, she blew out the candle and sat in the dark, the moonlight illuminating the sapphire on her finger. He thought he was ice. He thought he was a monster. Challenge accepted, she thought. She wasn't a damsel anymore. She was the Duchess of Blackwood, and she was going to melt the ice wolf, even if she had to burn the house down to do it. November bled into December, wrapping Blackwood Manor in a shroud of white frost. The days were quiet, filled with the mundane duties of running a great estate. Menus, tenant disputes, and silent dinners where Andrew read his correspondence, and Amelia stared at the tapestries. But the nights were different. Amelia began to notice a pattern. Every night at 2 a.m, the heavy oak door at the end of the corridor would open and close. Footsteps, uneven, heavy, dragging, would echo down the hall toward the forbidden west wing. The staff refused to speak of it. When Amelia asked Mrs. Graves why the Duke looked so pale in the mornings, the housekeeper merely tightened her lips and said, "The war does not leave a man just because he comes home, Your Grace." On the night of the first snowstorm of December, the silence broke. Amelia was awake, reading by the dying light of her fire, when she heard it. It wasn't footsteps this time. It was a crash, the sound of glass shattering against stone, followed by a roar, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. She didn't think. She grabbed her shawl and a candle, barefoot against the freezing floorboards. She ran past the portraits of the ancestors, past the boundary where the servants stopped cleaning, and into the dust-laden air of the west wing. The door to the tower room was ajar. Amelia pushed it open. The room was freezing. The windows had been thrown open to the blizzard. Snow was drifting in, settling on the furniture. Andrew was there. But he was not the Duke. He was not the ice wolf. He was on his knees in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of a mirror he had smashed. His shirt was torn, his chest heaving. He was shaking so violently, his teeth chattered, but not from the cold. He was hallucinating. "Get back!" he shouted at the empty air, swiping at invisible enemies. "Hold the line! Damn you, hold the line!" Amelia realized with a jolt of horror that he was back in Spain. He was reliving a battle. "Andrew!" she whispered, stepping into the room. He spun around. His eyes were wild, unseeing. In his hand, he held a shard of the mirror, gripping it so tight that blood dripped from his palm. "They're coming!" he rasped, looking through her. "The French. They're breaching the wall. I can't save them. I can't save any of them." Amelia set the candle down. Her heart was hammering in her throat, but instinct took over. She didn't retreat. She walked toward him. "Andrew," she said, her voice firm and loud over the howling wind. "Look at me." "Go!" he roared, backing away until he hit the wall. "I am dangerous. I will kill you." "You won't," Amelia said. She stepped into his reach. Andrew flinched as if she were a bayonet. He raised the hand with the glass shard. "Stay back." Amelia reached out and took his wrist. His skin was burning hot. He was consumed by a fever of the mind. She didn't pull away, even as his grip tightened on her arm, bruising the skin. "You are not in Spain," she said, forcing him to look at her blue eyes. "You are in Kent. You are at Blackwood. You are with me." Andrew blinked. The fog of war battled with the reality of her touch. "Amelia?" "Yes," she said softly. She reached up and touched his scar. "Drop the glass, Andrew." He looked at his hand as if it belonged to a stranger. Slowly, his fingers uncurled. The shard fell to the floor with a chiming sound. The moment the weapon was gone, the strength left him. He collapsed forward. Amelia caught him, the weight of him nearly driving her to her knees. She wrapped her arms around his waist, holding him up, his head burying into the crook of her neck. He began to weep. It wasn't the polite, silent weeping of the aristocracy. It was the ugly, jagged sobbing of a man who had held his grief inside an iron box for 10 years. He cried for the men he had ordered to their deaths. He cried for the youth he had lost. Amelia held him in the freezing room, stroking his hair, whispering nonsense words of comfort. She didn't care about the blood on his hand staining her nightgown. She didn't care about the cold. "I tried," he choked out, his voice broken. "I tried to be stone. If I am stone, I don't feel it." "You are not stone," Amelia whispered, pressing her cheek against his temple. "You are flesh and blood, and that is enough." She guided him away from the window, kicking the door shut against the storm. She led him to the dusty chaise longue and sat with him, pulling her shawl over his shivering shoulders. They sat there for hours until the storm outside quieted. Andrew didn't let go of her hand. The ice wolf had finally shattered, but what emerged wasn't a monster. It was a man, desperately lonely and terrified of his own humanity. And in the grey light of dawn, as he finally fell into a fitful sleep with his head in her lap, Amelia realized the truth. She didn't just want to save him. She loved him. The thaw came 2 days later, but the peace was fragile. Andrew was different. The rigid armor was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful exhaustion. He watched Amelia across the breakfast table, not with suspicion, but with a kind of awed curiosity, as if he couldn't believe she hadn't fled. "You should leave," he said quietly, stirring his tea. "After what you saw, no woman should be burdened with a madman." "I am not burdened," Amelia replied, buttering her toast with deliberate calm. "And I am not leaving. Unless, of course, you wish to break your contract regarding my father's vote." Andrew looked up. A flicker of a smile, a real one, touched his lips. "You are obstinate, Amelia." "I am a duchess," she corrected. "We are stubborn by definition." He reached across the table, his hand hovering over hers. Thank you. For the other night." Before Amelia could answer, the heavy doors of the dining hall burst open. It wasn't a servant. It was a man in a muddy riding coat, his face pale. It was the estate gamekeeper, waiting with his hat in his hands. "Your Grace," the man panted, "you must come. It's the folly near the frozen lake. Someone has set a fire." Andrew stood up instantly, the soldier returning in a heartbeat. "A fire? In this damp?" "They used oil, sir, and there's a message carved into the old oak. It has your name on it." Andrew's eyes went dark. He looked at Amelia. "Stay here." "No," Amelia stood up. "It's Thorn. He's come back." "That is exactly why you stay here." "He is threatening us, Andrew. I am coming." Andrew didn't have time to argue. He grabbed his coat and his pistols from the cabinet. "Stay behind me. If I say run, you run. Do you understand?" They rode out into the biting wind. The folly, a small ornamental temple by the lake, was indeed burning, sending black smoke into the grey sky. But the fire was a distraction. As they dismounted, a shot rang out. The bullet struck the ground inches from Andrew's boot, spraying dirt and snow. "So the wolf does bleed." Thomas Thorne stepped out from behind the trees. He looked deranged. His clothes were filthy, his eyes bloodshot. He held a dueling pistol in each hand. He had lost everything. His reputation, his money, his leverage. He was a man with nothing left but hate. "Thorne," Andrew said, his voice calm, stepping in front of Amelia. "Put the guns down. There is nowhere to go. The magistrate is already on his way." "I don't care about the magistrate," Thorne screamed. "You took everything from me, Blackwood. You took the girl. You took the power. You made me a laughingstock." Thorne raised the second pistol, aiming not at Andrew, but at Amelia. "I can't kill a duke without hanging," Thorne sneered. "But an accident? A stray bullet hitting the Duchess during a hunt? That's a tragedy." Andrew went rigid. "Look at me, Thorne. Not her." "She's the only thing you care about, isn't she?" Thorne laughed. "I saw the way you looked at her at the ball. The ice wolf found a mate." Thorne's finger tightened on the trigger. Time seemed to slow down. Amelia saw the madness in Thorne's eyes. She saw Andrew tense, preparing to move. "No!" Andrew shouted. As Thorne fired, Andrew didn't dive for cover. He dove for Amelia. He tackled her into the snow, shielding her body with his own. The shot cracked through the air. Amelia hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of her. She felt the heavy weight of Andrew on top of her. He jerked once, sharply, and then went still. "Andrew!" she screamed. She scrambled out from under him. Thorne was fumbling to reload, his hands shaking. Andrew lay in the snow. Blood was blooming on his shoulder, staining the pristine white crimson. But he was awake. His eyes were open, filled with a terrifying, cold rage. He didn't reach for his wound. He reached for the pistol he had dropped in the snow. Thorne looked up, panic setting in, as he saw the Duke rising to one knee, blood dripping from his coat. "Stay down!" Thorne shrieked. Andrew didn't speak. He raised his pistol. His hand, the hand that had shaken for weeks, the hand of a broken man, was perfectly steady. Bang! Thorne dropped his gun and clutched his leg, screaming as he fell to the ground, the bone shattered. Andrew lowered the smoking pistol. He didn't look at Thorne. He turned to Amelia. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with pain. "Am I hurt?" Amelia cried, crawling to him. She ripped the scarf from her neck and pressed it against his bleeding shoulder. "You foolish, arrogant man, you took a bullet." "Calculated risk," Andrew grunted, wincing as she applied pressure. "He's a bad shot. I knew he'd miss the heart." "You could have died." Amelia was sobbing now, tears of relief and anger freezing on her cheeks. Andrew reached up with his good hand and cupped her face, wiping away a tear with his thumb. "I couldn't let him touch you," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I have spent my life protecting England, Amelia. But today was the first time I realized I had something worth dying for." Amelia froze. The gamekeepers were running toward them now, seizing the screaming Thorne. But the world had narrowed down to just the two of them in the snow. "Andrew," she whispered. "I love you," he said. The words sounded rusty, unused, but he said them with the conviction of a vow. "I thought I was empty. But you filled the room. You filled the silence." He leaned his forehead against hers. "I am still broken, Amelia. I still have nightmares." "Then we will wake up from them together," she promised. Andrew closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "Yes, together." The scandal of the Clare debt was forgotten within a year, replaced by newer gossip. But the story of the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood endured. They say the Duke never fully lost his cold demeanour in public. He was still the ice wolf to the House of Lords. But those who visited Blackwood Manor told a different story. They spoke of a home filled with light, of a Duke who played piano in the evenings while his wife laughed, and of a nursery that was never silent. Andrew Sterling saved Amelia Clare from a cage of debt. But Amelia Clare saved Andrew Sterling from a cage of ice. And on the terrace where they first met, every year on November 14th, the Duke would dismiss the servants, light a cheroot, and dance with his wife in the cold. No music required, just the beating of two hearts that had survived the winter. And that is the true, dramatic, and scandalous story behind the Knight of the Shattered Sapphire. Historians often focus on the politics of the era, but the story of Andrew and Amelia reminds us that behind every great title and rigid law, there were real people fighting silent battles. Andrew Sterling thought his trauma made him unlovable, a common tragedy for men returning from the Napoleonic Wars. Amelia Clare proved that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply refuse to leave someone in the dark. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy, violent, and born of desperation. But perhaps that's what makes it feel so real. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the darker side of Regency romance, please hit that like button. It tells YouTube you want more historical storytelling. Which part of the story shocked you the most? Was it the Duke's hidden trauma, or the final confrontation in the snow? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear the story of Lord Thorne's trial, because believe me, that is a scandal all on its own, make sure you are subscribed and have the notification bell turned on. You won't want to miss the next chapter of history's secrets.